Alright, hello. This is part one. I'm not sure if there's going to be more than one part or not yet. That's yet. Well, we'll see how it goes. This is Adobe After Effects. I'm using Creative Cloud from 2017. And when you first start it up, you'll see this window. So you can either open or look at or make a new one. We'll click New in this case. And when you click New, you'll get this window. And this is a lot of things, and most of them don't actually matter. So the first thing is you need to choose a preset. NTSC and PAL are not super important for what we're doing, but they're also very complicated. What we need right now is this one. HDTV 1080 2997. So the width is 1920 by 1080. We have square pixels, and the frame rate is 29.97, which is basically 30, but not quite, and that's because of some weird quirks with the way that actually the power grid works usually, because TVs used to be synced to the power grid, which in the US is 60 hertz, and in the UK is 50 hertz, but in the United States it's not quite 60, it's just almost. And that leads to some weird quirks like 29.97. And then in this case I'll use full resolution. This just changes how detailed the renders are when you're looking at it. I have a nice computer so I can handle this. You might need to drop it to half or even a third or quarter. And it shouldn't make a difference in the final render. It's just for while you're creating it. We can also change this later, so it's not really a big deal. In background color, we will leave it with black for now because it doesn't especially matter. And then just click OK. So this workspace is a little bit different than the default, so I'll just save as new, looking good. And then I will set this to standard. By default it looks like this. I change it to standard and then to looking good, which is mine. And that just adds the align, paragraph, and character down here, and also do it vassal, but that's a much more complicated thing that we'll get into later. But that's character mapping. This part over here is the effects and presets, and also libraries. Libraries is just colors, it's the Adobe stock. Effects and presets, we'll be using this a lot. This is where Adobe After Effects really separates itself from Adobe Animate. There are things in here, let's just go over one of them right now. CC Particle World. And we'll just drag this onto the black area. Anything. And the reason for that is that we don't have anything to put it on yet. So this area is the, I'm not really sure what you'd call it, the controls area, the timeline. It's kind of both. So here is where our layers and whatever we're working with will show up. And there's also some effects, like effect controls that show up there. This area is the timeline. We can see what it's going to be looking like, and you'll notice that if you zoom in on this, it is 1 second and then 1:15, and the reason for that is that it's not quite 0.5 because we're at 29.97 FPS. So 15 frames is almost half, but not quite, and that's why it's separated like that. It's, for all intents and purposes, it's half though. And so this you'll set your keyframes along this, and also there are your graphs are in here as well, which will make more sense once we get started. In this area is where you'll have the different parts of like what makes your thing up. A composition is almost like a folder, but it's more dynamic than that. So right now, comp 1 is open, and that's the one we just made at the beginning. So compositions store things. Compositions things can be done to things inside of them, or things can be done to compositions themselves, and we'll be doing some of both. Finally, the other tab in that is Effect Controls, which you use for these effects. Preview, use it or ignore it. I ignore it, just use the spacebar. In this area, you can see your audio, or you can see your info. It's not super important, really. And this is where your actual tools are. And then, of course, there's these as well. What I'm going to do first is I'm going to give ourselves a place to put CC Particle World. So I'm going to right click here and click New Solid. I could also go to Layer, New Solid, however I want to do it. So I want it to be 1920 by 1080, but I want it to be a darkish gray. You notice it automatically renews it to dark gray solid, but I want it to be background. And I want it to be square pixels. It's already the composition size. I can resize it if I want. I don't want to, so I'm just going to click OK. You notice it's now the color I selected, and now across this whole thing there's a red bar, and I can change that if I want. So let's go ahead and drag on CC Particle World. And you'll notice when I hover over it, it has a new effect. But I can also drag it onto here. It's really however I want. You know, now there's a grid. It looks a little bit confusing, but you'll notice it now here in the effect controls. It might be on project for you. Just click over if it is. There's new things here that weren't before, and that's because we've added an effect. You can also modify much of this from within here. But this gets annoying really fast when you have lots of things in here. So the first thing we need to do right now, if we play it, it does this. And this looks neat, but it's not really what we want. And I'm going to change this down to half because I'm also screen recording, and that limits what the computer can handle. So that's that thing I said it could change later. It just changes how detailed your preview is. We'll even set it to auto. So this is a super customizable effect, and honestly, a lot of the changes you can make to this will carry over to other effects as well. So the first thing I'm going to do is I want this. If I just change these, it'll change it across the entire animation. I'll show you later how to apply it to just part of it. But right now, I want the particles to last longer, so I'm just going to drag this up. If I hold shift, it moves more quickly. If I hold command, it moves much more slowly. I want this to be at about 1.4, 1.3, and let's make it spawn more as well. 2.9. Now, I can do a lot more than this, though. Let's say the producer, which is this point here, I want that to be closer to the camera. And now if we play it, there's a lot more of it. But it's still just it's still a pretty basic effect. So I'm going to move this back. And I'm going to go under particle. In this case right now it is aligned, but it doesn't need to be. I can make it a star. I can make it a shaded sphere. Let's go with this for now. Let's make a nice snow effect. So it doesn't, no matter where I go in this timeline, it's always going to be looking roughly the same way. So what I'm going to go is make a snow effect. So I'm going to move the producer closer so you're looking like right into it. And now if we play it, it's really in your face, but it's really big. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to keep this as a shaded sphere. But what I'm also going to do is change the birth size down. Except I want this to be like kind of overwhelming at the beginning and then smooth out. So I'm going to click this keyframe button. And what that means is that as we move along this, it's going to enable us to change it. So right now, It's pretty small because I changed that rose. So let's scale it back up. But that's pretty intense. So I'm going to bring back down birth rate, holding command to make it really small. Maybe a tiny bit bigger. I'm thinking that maybe 0.45 ought to be good. There we go. And then the other thing I need to do is I'm going to make the longevity up more. There we go. And I want the producer to be wider as well, because I want more. I want it to be like there to be more on the screen at once, and I want it to be spread out more. That looks pretty good to me. So at the beginning, it's really big particles, but we want that to fade away pretty quick. So let's actually bring up the birth rate. 0.5. There we go. That's just about perfect. So I'm also going to keyframe this. So now both of these, you'll notice that there's two dots down here. And that's because that's where the keyframes are. If I move it in some, and then bring the birth rate down to 0.4, you'll notice that as I go back to the beginning, it's back to 0.5. If I bring it back over here, it's down to 0.4. You can see the corresponding dots right here. In the middle, it's the middle points. If I can drag these along, and now it's a more gradual change. But I don't want to do that actually. I want it to be a shorter change. And then what I want to happen is I want it to shrink a little bit more than it is. So I'm just going to change this to about 0.270, 0.230 actually. And now they'll start out bigger and then get smaller, and that's going to be across the whole thing, except that when this gets smaller, I also want the depth size to get smaller, so make this 0.170. At this point it's a much more refined effect, but it's not enough yet. So I'm going to bring it back to this point, because this is where I've chosen to have the birth rate change. Now I'm going to bring this, you can change this in either point. I'm going to bring the birth size down to about 0.240. And then, but now that they're so much smaller, there's not enough of anymore. So I will just bring up particle. Bring up the birth rate to 0.36. There we go. Now the other thing, obviously, is that this doesn't look much like snow right now. It's yellow and orange. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to change this to a white, well, to a gray at birth, a lightish gray, but still a gray. And then at death, it's going to be very bright. We'll see how that goes. I think that I actually want to flip these. So it's going to start at white and die at gray. You notice it's really packed, then it gets smaller. But the other problem with this is that as of now there's such a massive size variation, and I want that at the beginning, but I don't later on. So I'll bring this back down to about 25%, which is half the possible size different before. Still not enough. 15. Alright, I guess that'll work. Now this looks good, but it's not enough. And it's also linear. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to look into displace. Turbulent displace. Much better. So this applies just a displacement to all the particles, as you might expect. And you can modify that. This looks a lot better. And then the other thing I want to do is I'm going to go back under particle world and just change the maximum opacity down to maybe 60%. And now as we start, it's really crowded and it gets a lot less. And then it just continues like this. So what I want to do now is I want to give it better background for this. So I'm going to select the layer and then press Shift Y. Command Shift Y, my mistake. And then this will allow you to modify. If you just do Command Y, it'll make a new layer instead. And what we're going to do is just make this a nice bluish white. And I'm going to make a separate layer for it. In which I delete both of these and then set that to the bottom one. And now it looks like a snowball fight. So these are some good starts. But now let's look at how we would do something that's more like what an animation would be. But I'm going to put that in the next video because this is already 18 minutes and 20 seconds. It's pretty long. So I will catch you in the next one.